The champagne glass shattered the moment the fiancée screamed for everyone to see. One wrong move could cost the maid her job, her reputation, and the roof over her daughter's head. But no one in that ballroom knew the fiancé had been planning this moment for weeks. The billionaire stood frozen, watching the woman he trusted turn into someone he didn't recognize. And what the maid was holding in her hand that night would change everything he thought he knew about the woman he was about to marry. Welcome back, everyone, to another story about truth, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to survive a lie. If you love stories about betrayal, hidden secrets, and justice finally catching up to the guilty, you're exactly where you need to be. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments, and if you haven't yet, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. The penthouse on the 62nd floor glittered like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers threw soft gold light across marble floors, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the entire skyline of Manhattan stretched out like a carpet of diamonds. Tonight was Nathaniel Cole's engagement party, and every important person in the city had been invited. Nathaniel stood near the window, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand, watching the room fill with people he mostly didn't know. He was 36 years old, built a logistics empire from nothing but a single warehouse his father left him, and had spent the last decade being told by everyone around him that he worked too hard and trusted too easily. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was getting engaged to Vanessa Whitmore. Vanessa moved through the crowd like she owned it, which, in a sense, she did. 31 years old, elegant in a floor-length red gown. Her laughter carried across the room in practiced musical bursts. She touched arms, kissed cheeks, complimented dresses. Everyone loved her. Everyone except the people who worked closely enough to see the cracks. One of those people was Amara Johnson. Amara had been working as the head housekeeper for the Cole residence for almost 2 years. She was 27, quiet in the way that came from experience rather than shyness, and she moved through the penthouse tonight with a tray of appetizers, careful not to bump into anyone's expensive clothing. She had a daughter at home, 3-year-old Zoe, currently asleep at her sister's apartment 2 subway stops away. Amara had taken this job because it paid well, because Nathaniel had always been fair with her, and because after her husband died 2 years ago, she needed something stable. She had learned quickly that stability had a price. That price was Vanessa. From the moment Vanessa moved into the penthouse 8 months ago, something in the air had shifted. Small things at first. A missing bracelet that turned up days later in a drawer Amara had never opened, a comment about how some people don't understand boundaries, a look that lingered a second too long whenever Nathaniel spoke to Amara about anything, even something as simple as which detergent to use on his shirts. Amara had said nothing. She needed the job. She kept her head down and did her work well, the way she always had. Tonight, though, something felt different. Vanessa had been watching her all evening. A tight smile stretched across her face every time their eyes met. It wasn't paranoia. Amara had learned to read rooms the way some people read books, and this room was telling her that something was about to happen. She didn't have to wait long. It happened near the dessert table, in front of at least 30 guests. Amara had just set down a fresh tray of champagne flutes when Vanessa appeared beside her, holding her own half-empty glass. "You know," Vanessa said, her voice pitched just loud enough to draw attention, "I've been noticing things are missing from the penthouse. Small things. Bracelet. A pair of earrings." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "It's strange, don't you think? Things only go missing when certain people are around." The room around them quieted. A few guests exchanged glances. Nathaniel, still by the window, turned at the sudden change in the air. Amara felt her stomach drop, but she kept her voice level. "Ms. Whitmore, I don't know what you're referring to." Nothing has gone missing that I'm aware of. Of course you'd say that. Vanessa's smile didn't move, but her eyes had gone cold. It's just funny how these things happen right after you're in a room alone. By now, Nathaniel had crossed the floor. Vanessa, what's going on? Nothing, darling. She turned to him, her expression softening instantly, like flipping a switch. I was just mentioning that a few things have gone missing lately. I'm sure it's nothing. It wasn't nothing, and everyone in that room could feel it. Amara stood there, tray still in her hands, 30 pairs of eyes on her, and she understood in that moment that something had shifted permanently. This wasn't an accusation. This was the opening move of something much bigger. Nathaniel studied Amara's face, then Vanessa's, then looked around at the guests who were suddenly very interested in their drinks. Let's not do this here, he said quietly, and the party resumed its noise, though the temperature in the room had cooled by several degrees. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the penthouse had returned to its usual quiet, Amara found herself gathering the last of the glasses when Nathaniel approached her. I'm sorry about that, he said. Vanessa's been under a lot of stress with the wedding planning. I don't think she meant anything by it. Amara nodded, though something in her chest tightened at how easily he explained it away. I understand, Mr. Cole. I hope nothing actually did go missing. I'm sure it'll turn up, he said, though his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, as if he were trying to read something in her face. You've always been reliable, Amara. I know that. It was meant to be reassuring. Instead, it felt like the first crack in something that hadn't broken yet, but would. As Amara rode the elevator down that night, exhausted and rattled, she thought about Zoe waiting for her at her sister's place, about the rent that was due in 2 weeks, about how one wrong word from a woman in a red dress could unravel everything she'd worked so hard to hold together. She didn't know yet what Vanessa was planning. She only knew, with the kind of certainty that lives in the gut rather than the head, that tonight was only the beginning. Somewhere above her, in the penthouse she'd just left, Vanessa Whitmore stood in front of her bathroom mirror, removing her earrings one at a time, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of her mouth. She'd wanted to see how the room would react. Now she knew. The real plan hadn't even started yet. 3 days after the engagement party, the bracelet Vanessa had mentioned turned up. Not in a drawer, not in a jewelry box, but tucked inside a laundry basket in the staff quarters where Amara kept her cleaning supplies. Nathaniel found it himself. He'd gone down to ask Amara about the dry cleaning schedule and noticed something glinting under a folded towel. When he pulled it out, his stomach turned. It was the diamond tennis bracelet Vanessa had been asking about, the one that had supposedly been missing for over a week. He stood there holding it for a long moment before he called Amara in. I found this in your supply closet, he said, keeping his voice neutral, though his eyes were searching her face carefully. Amara felt the floor tilt beneath her. Mr. Cole, I swear to you, I have never seen that bracelet before in my life. I don't even go into that closet unless I'm restocking supplies, and I did that Tuesday morning. Someone put it there, he said slowly. It wasn't me. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression told her he wanted to believe her. But wanting to believe something and actually believing it were two very different things when there was physical evidence sitting in his palm. I'm not accusing you, he said finally. But I have to ask Vanessa about this. When he brought the bracelet to Vanessa that evening, her reaction was immediate and perfectly calibrated. Shock, relief, and just enough hurt to make it convincing. I told you something felt wrong, she said, clutching the bracelet to her chest. I didn't want to believe it, Nathaniel, but I felt uneasy about her for weeks now. We don't know for certain it was her. Who else has access to that closet? Vanessa's voice cracked slightly, tears welling in her eyes. I'm not trying to get anyone fired. I just want to feel safe in my own home. It was a good performance. Nathaniel, for all his business instincts, for all the years he'd spent reading contracts and negotiating with people who lied for a living, found himself unable to see through it. Vanessa was, after all, about to become his wife. Why would she lie about something like this? But there was one thing that nagged at him later that night, lying awake beside her. If Amara had truly stolen the bracelet, why would she hide it somewhere so obvious? Somewhere she herself would find within days during routine restocking. It didn't add up, not for someone as careful and meticulous as Amara had always been in the 2 years she'd worked for him. He said nothing about it to Vanessa, but the question stayed with him. Meanwhile, Amara was fighting to keep her composure. She hadn't been fired, not yet, but the atmosphere in the penthouse had changed completely. Vanessa now watched her every move, made comments about keeping an eye on things, and twice accidentally left cash out in visible places, only to check later whether it had been touched. Amara understood exactly what was happening. She was being tested, set up, cornered. And she had no proof of any of it. That week something unexpected happened. Amara's daughter, Zoe, came to the penthouse for a few hours after her preschool closed early for a teacher training day, since Amara's sister couldn't pick her up in time. Nathaniel had always been kind to Zoe, letting her sit in the kitchen with coloring books while Amara worked. But this time, Vanessa insisted on helping watch her while Amara finished the bedrooms upstairs. When Amara came back downstairs an hour later, she found Zoe sitting quietly at the kitchen table, unusually still, staring at her hands. "Baby, what's wrong?" Amara knelt down in front of her. Zoe looked up at her mother with wide eyes. "The pretty lady said Mommy is going to get in trouble. She said Mommy might have to go away." Amara's blood went cold. "What else did she say, sweetheart?" "She said I shouldn't tell you she said it." Zoe's small voice trembled. "But I don't want you to go away, Mommy." Amara pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly while her mind raced. This wasn't just about a bracelet anymore. Vanessa was willing to frighten a 3-year-old child to get to her. That night, after Zoe had been picked up by Amara's sister, Amara sat alone in the small break room off the kitchen, staring at her hands. She thought about quitting. She thought about walking away from all of it. The false accusations, the constant surveillance, the fear that lived in her chest every time she walked through that penthouse door. But she also thought about her rent, about Zoe's preschool tuition, about the fact that finding another job that paid this well would take months she didn't have. She decided in that quiet room that she would not run. She would be careful. She would document everything. And she would wait for the moment when the truth would have nowhere left to hide. She just didn't know yet how close and how dangerous that moment would be. 2 days later, she found something that changed everything. A receipt, crumpled at the bottom of the kitchen trash, from a locksmith shop 3 blocks away. It was dated the day before the bracelet had gone missing. Amara didn't understand yet what it meant. But she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket, a small piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to see the edges of. The receipt sat in the drawer of Amara's small apartment for 4 days before she worked up the courage to do anything about it. She wasn't a detective. She wasn't someone who went looking for trouble. But something about that piece of paper wouldn't let her rest. On her day off, she took the subway to the address printed on the receipt, a small locksmith shop tucked between a laundromat and a bodega, the kind of place most people walked past without noticing. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside. The man behind the counter was older, maybe 60, with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. Amara showed him the receipt, her heart pounding. "I'm trying to figure out what this was for," she said carefully. "I found it and I think it might belong to someone I work for." The man squinted at the paper, then typed something into an old computer. "Ah yeah, I remember this one. Woman came in, wanted a duplicate key made for a jewelry box. Real specific about it. Wanted it done quiet, paid extra for same-day service." Amara's pulse quickened. "Do you remember what she looked like?" A shrug. Pretty woman, expensive coat, kind of impatient. Why is this important? I think it might be, Amara said quietly. She left the shop with more questions than answers, but one thing was now clear in her mind. If Vanessa had made a duplicate key to her own jewelry box before the bracelet supposedly went missing, that meant one of two things. Either she was being unnecessarily cautious, or she had planned the entire disappearance herself, ensuring she'd have access to the bracelet even after losing it, so she could plant it whenever and wherever she wanted. The timeline made her stomach turn. The key had been made one day before the party where Vanessa first publicly accused her. This wasn't paranoia. This was a plan. But a receipt from a locksmith wasn't proof of anything on its own. Amara needed something more solid, and she had no idea how to get it without putting her job, and possibly her safety, at even greater risk. The turning point came unexpectedly, through someone Amara hadn't considered an ally. Nathaniel's older sister Diane. Diane had never fully warmed to Vanessa, though she'd kept her opinions mostly to herself for her brother's sake. She'd noticed things over the months. The way Vanessa's kindness towards staff always seemed to have an audience, the way her stories about concerning incidents always seemed to happen when no one else was around to witness them directly. Diane stopped by the penthouse one afternoon when Nathaniel was at a business meeting, ostensibly to drop off a gift for the upcoming wedding. She found Amara in the hallway, visibly tense, and something about the younger woman's exhaustion made Diane pause. "Are you all right?" Diane asked, her voice gentler than Amara expected. Amara hesitated. She'd learned to keep her guard up, to say the safe thing, the professional thing. But something about Diane's genuine concern broke through the wall she'd built. "Can I ask you something, Ms. Cole? Have you ever felt like something wasn't right about this house? About the accusations that keep happening?" Diane's expression sharpened. "I've felt that way for months. What do you know?" It was a risk telling her. If Diane repeated any of this to Vanessa, Amara's situation could become immediately worse. But instinct told her Diane was different, that her concern wasn't performance the way Vanessa's often was. Amara told her everything: the bracelet found in the supply closet, Zoe's frightened confession about what Vanessa had said to her, and finally, the locksmith receipt. Diane listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening as the story unfolded. When Amara finished, Diane was quiet for a long moment. "My brother needs to see this," she said finally. "Not from me. From you. He needs to hear it directly, and he needs proof, not just a story." "He won't believe me over her," Amara said quietly. "Nobody ever does." "He might," Diane said. "Nathaniel isn't a fool. He's just in love, which makes even smart people blind for a while. But he's starting to notice things too. Can tell. He asked me last week if I thought Vanessa was being completely honest with him." That single sentence changed something in Amara. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something other than fear, something closer to hope. But hope was dangerous too because it meant she had something to lose. That same evening, Vanessa returned home to find Diane's car still parked outside the building longer than usual. When she came upstairs and saw Diane and Amara standing together in the hallway, mid-conversation, something shifted behind her eyes. A flash of alarm quickly smoothed over into practiced calm. "Diane, what a surprise," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I didn't know you were stopping by." "Just dropping off a gift," Diane said evenly. "And catching up with Amara. She's been a wonderful help around here." Vanessa's gaze flicked to Amara, cold and calculating, then back to Diane, warm and practiced. "Of course she has." But as Diane left that evening, she caught Vanessa watching Amara through the kitchen window with an expression that made her blood run cold. Not anger, not jealousy, but something far more dangerous. The look of someone recalculating a plan that had just become more complicated than she'd anticipated. Something was about to accelerate. Diane could feel it. And so could Amara. Section 4, The Trap. Vanessa Whitmore did not panic easily, but the sight of Diane and Amara together had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. If Amara had started talking, if Nathaniel's sister was starting to ask questions, the careful narrative Vanessa had been building for months could unravel faster than she could control. She decided it was time to escalate. The following week, Vanessa announced she was hosting a smaller gathering, just close friends and family, to finalize wedding details. It would take place in the penthouse, and she personally requested that Amara serve the evening, insisting it would be good for her to be included in something more intimate after the misunderstanding at the engagement party. Nathaniel found the gesture oddly generous, a sign, he thought, that Vanessa was trying to smooth things over. Amara knew better. She recognized a setup when she saw one, even if she couldn't yet see its shape. The evening began normally enough. Candlelight, soft music, a dozen guests scattered across the living room in easy conversation. Amara moved carefully through the space, refilling glasses, checking that everything ran smoothly, watching Vanessa's every movement from the corner of her eye. It happened around 9 o'clock. Vanessa excused herself to freshen up, and when she returned 15 minutes later, she was visibly distressed, clutching her wrist where a diamond pendant necklace should have been. "My necklace," she said, her voice rising just enough for the room to hear. "It's gone. I had it on 20 minutes ago." The room's easy atmosphere evaporated instantly. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Nathaniel crossed the room quickly. "Where were you when you noticed it missing?" "In the bedroom," Vanessa said, tears welling with impressive precision. "I set it on the dresser for just a moment while I fixed my makeup, and when I turned around it was gone." All eyes inevitably turned toward Amara, who had been upstairs only minutes earlier, delivering fresh towels to the guest bathroom. "I didn't take anything," Amara said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening in her chest. "I was only in the hallway bathroom, not the bedroom." "Can anyone confirm that?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling with practiced hurt. The room fell silent. No one had been watching Amara's exact movements. This was exactly what Vanessa had planned. A moment with no witnesses, no alibi, just Amara's word against a room full of Vanessa's friends and family. Nathaniel's face had gone pale, caught between the woman he loved and the employee he'd trusted for 2 years. "I think we should search the penthouse," he said quietly. Calmly. No accusations yet. It was Diane who spoke next, stepping forward with a composure that cut through the tension. "Before anyone searches anything, I think we should check the security footage. We had cameras installed in the hallway last month, remember, Nathaniel? After that break-in scare in the building next door." Vanessa's face flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but Diane caught it, and so did Amara. "That's a good idea," Nathaniel said, already moving toward his study where the security monitor was kept. The room followed him, a strange procession of formal wear and tense silence. Nathaniel pulled up the footage from the hallway camera, scrolling back to the estimated time of the necklace's disappearance. The footage showed Amara walking from the guest bathroom directly to the linen closet and back downstairs, never once entering the bedroom. It also showed something else, something Vanessa clearly hadn't anticipated. Herself walking back into the bedroom alone just minutes before announcing the necklace missing, then emerging without it, walking calmly to the kitchen, and returning to the living room composed and smiling, only to discover the loss 15 minutes later in front of witnesses. The room went completely silent. "That doesn't prove anything," Vanessa said quickly, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Maybe I set it down somewhere else." "Maybe." "Vanessa." Nathaniel's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight none of them had heard from him before. "Where is the necklace right now?" She didn't answer. "I want to check your handbag," he said. "Nathaniel, this is insulting." "Then you won't mind." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it was only seconds. Finally, with trembling hands, Vanessa retrieved her handbag from the side table. Nathaniel opened it in front of everyone, and there, tucked into an inner pocket beside her phone, was the diamond necklace. Gasps rippled through the room. Vanessa's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. "I can explain," she said, but her voice had lost all its earlier certainty. Nathaniel looked at her for a long, heavy moment, something in his expression breaking and hardening all at once. "I think you'd better." The room emptied slowly, guests murmuring their goodbyes, unwilling to witness what was clearly about to become a very different kind of evening. Diane guided the last of them to the door, then returned to find her brother standing in the study, the necklace still in his palm, staring at Vanessa as if seeing her for the first time. Amara stood quietly near the doorway, exhausted, vindicated, and terrified all at once. She had been right. But being right didn't feel like victory yet, not with Vanessa's eyes now fixed on her with something colder and more dangerous than jealousy. "This isn't over," Vanessa said quietly, just loud enough for Amara to hear as she walked past her toward the bedroom, leaving Nathaniel standing alone with the truth finally, undeniably in his hands. Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study long after the last guest had gone, the necklace resting on the desk in front of him like evidence in a trial he never wanted to attend. Piece by piece, he made himself walk back through the last 8 months. The bracelet in the supply closet, the tears that always arrived exactly on cue, the way Vanessa's stories about Amara had always lacked witnesses, always relied on his trust rather than proof. He thought about the first time he'd met Vanessa at a charity gala 2 years ago, how effortlessly charming she'd been, how she'd made him feel like the most interesting man in the room. He thought about how easy it had been to believe her, because believing her had been easier than doubting the woman he was planning to marry. Now, sitting alone with the truth, he felt something closer to grief than anger. Grief for the version of Vanessa he'd let himself believe in, and anger at himself for not seeing it sooner. The next morning he called Amara into the study. She arrived braced for the worst, expecting perhaps that she'd be let go regardless, simply to avoid further complication. Instead, Nathaniel stood as she entered, something in his posture different from the careful professionalism he usually maintained. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "A real one. Not just for last night. For all of it. For not asking harder questions when the bracelet turned up. For not noticing sooner how much pressure you were under in this house." Amara said nothing at first, unsure how to respond to an apology she hadn't expected to receive. "I looked into a few things this morning," Nathaniel continued. "I spoke to the locksmith myself. Confirmed the timeline. Vanessa had a key made to her own jewelry box the day before she first accused you at the engagement party. She's been staging all of this from the very beginning." "I wasn't trying to cause trouble," Amara said finally. "I just wanted to protect my job. My daughter." "I know." Nathaniel's voice was low, sincere. "And I should have protected you both a long time ago. That's on me." The conversation that followed wasn't long, but it was honest in a way few conversations in that penthouse had been in months. Nathaniel confirmed the engagement was over. Vanessa had already left the building that morning, her belongings packed hastily by a service he'd arranged, her calls to him going unanswered by his own choice. He also confirmed something else. Amara's position and her reputation were fully restored. More than that, he insisted on covering any wages lost during the weeks of stress and suspicion, and quietly arranged for Zoe's preschool tuition to be covered for the remainder of the year. Not as charity, he was careful to clarify, but as basic decency long overdue. "You don't have to do that," Amara said. "I know I don't have to," he replied. "I want to." 3 weeks later, the story of the broken engagement had made its way through the social circles Vanessa had once dominated, the truth spreading in whispers at first, then more openly as details emerged. She did not face criminal charges. There wasn't enough evidence to pursue theft charges for jewelry she technically owned, but the damage to her reputation was its own kind of consequence. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped arriving. The life she'd built on charm and careful manipulation began, piece by piece, to fall away. Amara, meanwhile, found something she hadn't expected in the aftermath. Not just vindication, but a quiet kind of respect from Nathaniel that had never quite existed before, not because he pitied her, but because he'd finally seen, clearly and without illusion, the strength it had taken her to endure months of quiet cruelty without losing herself in the process. One evening, several weeks later, Nathaniel found Amara in the kitchen, helping Zoe with a coloring book at the counter while she waited for her shift to end. He watched them for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking," he said, "about expanding the household staff, restructuring some things. I'd like you to consider a promotion. Head of household operations. More responsibility, better pay, and honestly, someone I trust completely to run things." Amara looked up, surprised. "Mr. Cole, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said, a small, genuine smile crossing his face for what felt like the first time in months. "You've earned it. Not because of what happened with Vanessa. Because of who you've been this entire time, even when it would have been easier to walk away." Zoe looked up from her coloring book, glancing between the two adults with the quiet observance only a 3-year-old seemed capable of. "Are we staying, Mommy?" Amara looked down at her daughter, then back at Nathaniel, something loosening in her chest that had been tight for months. "Yeah, baby," she said softly. "I think we are." Outside, the city lights were just beginning to flicker on as evening settled over Manhattan, the same skyline that had watched Vanessa's carefully built lies collapse now witnessing something quieter, steadier. A woman who had held her dignity through months of cruelty, finally given the respect she deserved all along. The truth, in the end, hadn't needed to shout to be heard. It had simply needed someone patient enough to wait for it, and brave enough to speak it when the moment finally came. If you were in Amara's position, would you have stayed silent to protect your job, or spoken up sooner no matter the risk? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and we'll see you in the next story.